Are you tired of having to replace your brake caliper every time it locks up? Are you also tired of people laughing at your brake calipers because they don't support the sportiness of your vehicle? Well, then you're in luck, because today at Mighty Little Shop, I'll be showing you how not only to rebuild your caliper, but also how to freshen it up with a brand new paint job. So for those of you who have been following along with all of my videos, first of all, thank you, you're a legend. Second of all, I bet you're curious whatever happened to that turbo Forester we were going to be building. Well, I have an engine over there, and in a different video I'll explain to you what's been happening. I promise you that is still the goal. However, being that the case is I still plan on turboing that Forester, I obviously don't want to put factory standard brakes back on that car. So I don't want to replace my brakes entirely now with factory brakes just to take them off again in a couple months. So instead, I'm rebuilding the caliper that's already there to try to save a little bit of money now so that in the future I can do the upgrade properly that I would like to do to match the WRX engine. Anyway, like the thumbnail says, today I'm going to be showing you how to take your calipers from this to this. So let's go get started on rebuilding those calipers. Okay, so the first step towards refreshing your calipers are to make sure they are clean and don't have any rust or brake dust on them. The way to do that is to obviously clean them. Now I have soapy water in this bucket, and this one's just to hold the caliper. Basically, we're gonna spray it down and use a variety of brushes and Scotch-Brite stainless steel pads to make sure that they are clean, and then we're gonna wash them up and then paint them, or rebuild them, then paint them. So once you're finished scrubbing and washing it down, wash it off with water one last time, and then we're gonna take some brake parts cleaner and try to clean up whatever's left. Once all is said and done, you'll end up with something a little bit like this. I wanna talk real quick about plugging the holes in the caliper. So this plug actually came off the bleeder cap. That's something you're gonna wanna plug in the brake line hole, so that way you don't end up filling your caliper with water, because that will obviously make it seize. The bleeder is actually closed off to the inside of the caliper, so you don't really have to worry about that. When we're done painting it, this is gonna get greased and reinstalled anyway. Oftentimes, if it's a caliper that you really want to look really clean, you can replace these bleeders. You can get these from the pack online. You can get them from AutoZone, Harbor Freight, a lot of those different places. And on that note, let's start rebuilding this caliper so you can see how that's done. So what we have here is a caliper rebuild kit. These are going to be your dust boots that go on the outside of the face of the piston that you see, and they do blocking of dust and water from getting inside the caliper and not necessarily brake fluid. Now what does the sealing of the brake fluid is these square cut seals. They'll go inside the caliper and seal up against the piston, so as the piston moves back and forth, it slides easily but is sealed off so that no fluid is getting out into the world. These are just the rings that hold the dust boots in place, and this is a bleeder cap for the top of your bleeder nipple. Now as you can see, I only have one piston, when this is a dual piston caliper. And that is because, well, I only got one piston in the mail. Now in order to deal with the single piston issue, I want to install this to show you guys the process of how to do it, which applies to a single piston and is just repeated for a dual piston caliper. Anyway, let's move on to the fun bit. I'm going to rebuild these calipers and then mask everything off so that we can finally spray it in our sports car red. Now once you have your bleeder free, feel free to check it over and make sure that it's not rusted or have any obstructions. If you're unsure of the condition of your bleeder screw or don't feel secure putting it back into your caliper, replace it with one from a parts store. This way, bleeding your caliper in the future won't be a problem. For now though, we're gonna put it back in so that we can pop out our piston. So you're gonna wanna remove the rubber cap you installed earlier. Next, get a rubber tipped airline and stick it inside that port to blow these pistons out. Now it's important to make sure that you don't just blow the piston right out the front of the caliper. Get yourself a small block of wood just to catch the pistons as they shoot out. 1. If you get one piston that pops out like that and a single piston, you're good. In a dual piston setup, simply try to get a shorter piece to hold that piston from launching all the way out, therefore putting more pressure on the other piston, and that should do the trick. And there you go. Now you'll want to grab yourself a pick and root around in there to get the square cut seal out. Just like that. Now you'll also want to fish out the retaining ring if any of those have stayed in, which in this case, only one did in this piston right here. Now to give you an example, this piston, as you can see, is very clean, and this is an old one out of the caliper on this side. This piston, as you can see, is not as clean. Now typically that's caused by some sort of hole in the dust boot here, allowing water and dirt to get in and create this rusting issue here. Now this piston was not the cause of failure on this caliper, but given enough time, it very well would have been a point of failure. Now you may be able to tell in this caliper bore that this front lip is not clean, meaning that's where the rust was coming from. So you're going to want to clean that up with either some Scotch-Brite pads, emery cloth, or sandpaper of a very high grit. You don't want to leave grooves that will create a leak, so that's why I recommend using Scotch-Brite, as it's very soft and not a very low grit. Once you clean up the piston bores in the caliper, we're going to brake clean the whole caliper once more, including inside there, to make sure it's as clean as can be before we reassemble. Much better. So next we're going to install the square cut seal, which is the actual fluid seal around the new piston. Now the best way to achieve a perfect seal is to take a brand new bottle of .3 or .4 fluid, depending on your vehicle specifications and requirements. With that, you want to pre-lubricate these square seals and also the piston itself so that everything slides together nicely and you don't run into any problems. The more the better, don't be shy. So when all is said and done and that piston is installed, it should look like this. Now let me show you how to achieve this result, and bear in mind, it's not easy. So like with every assembly job, you're going to want to make sure what you're assembling is well coated. So take some of that brake fluid and coat the new piston. Beautiful. Next, grab your new boot, lubricate the inside of that as well, lubricate the outside edge. Next, take the cup side of your piston and make sure that it is facing down, because you're going to push the boot on down from the top. The dust boot here has a lip. Underneath that lip sits the metal ring. This ring expands and keeps the boot tight inside the bore on the caliper. So with this lip facing what will be outward, you're going to face it down because the bottom is actually what's facing outward. With this ring lubricated, force it down onto the piston like that. Oftentimes what will happen is this ring will be rolled because of how you've had to roll it down over the piston. So grab any sort of plastic trim tool like this, make sure that it is well lubricated as well, and work around that lip until that is flat, just like that. Slide this up to the top. Now your boot is installed. Next you'll want to, you guessed it, lubricate it. Take a little bit of that and lubricate the square cut seal on the inside of the piston bore, and what the heck, lubricate the piston again. Starting with the big flat face and the cup out, insert that into the edge of the caliper. Make sure the bottom of the boot slips into the bore, and now press your caliper piston in. Most caliper pistons you'll be able to slide in by hand. If you have difficulty, take an old brake pad and the caliper press tool and start to press down on that piston. You shouldn't have to put much pressure on this at all. It's light twisting motion, and you should watch the caliper slide in nice and evenly. Now once that piston has dropped in far enough, the inside edge of that rubber boot will drop into this groove, and you're going to use the clearance you now have to push the outside of this boot up into the caliper bore. To push this piston in even further, there's a few tricks. In my case, I take a 19mm socket, slip it in the piston like that, and use that to space out the tool. Now you want to slide the outer ring of the boot into the caliper by working around it like so. Once that is done, you want to take the retaining ring. With this retaining ring, you want to make sure it's on the outside of the expansion boot, but inside the caliper. Press it down into the caliper until it seats all the way down into that groove, holding the boot in place. And there you have a rebuilt caliper. Now both of these pistons have been cleaned or replaced, the gaskets have been replaced, and the dust boots have also been replaced. One way to test this is to take the caliper depression tool, place it in position. You shorten the stroke enough to leave a small gap there. You can apply the same method that you used before to extract the pistons. So if you get to this position where the pistons are sealed and the boots are installed properly and well seated, you can now recompress the pistons, paint the caliper, and install it. So once you've brake cleaned your caliper again, just to ensure that all of the brake fluid you just got on it is now gone, we're gonna mask it up and paint it. That, of course, is gonna look like this. For about $20, including the gaskets, the seals, and the paint, that's a lot better. So the calipers are done and the new brake's gonna go back on, and we have a fresh brake situation that will easily last us until our WRX swap. I hope you guys like that. If you did, stay tuned, because next time we do a rebuild on a Brembo-esque Z32 Nissan brake caliper. Well, all four. Anyway guys, stay tuned for that, and for now, that's all I've got. I hope you enjoyed. See you next time.